and welcome to the oil change on the XVS 650 V-Star or Dragstar. Now, you may have noticed from looking at the length of this video that it's longer than you would expect for an oil change. Oil changes are normally one of the most simple things that you can do on a bike. They really are quite straightforward. Unfortunately, it does appear that Yamaha's designers were far more interested in the look of the bike than in the ability to work on it. Now, I know I've said this is an easy bike to work on, but this is a bit of an exception, to be fair. So it's going to take a little while to get through, but I'm going to try and cover all the bases for those of you who are not familiar with doing it on this bike. You'll notice also that I'm using a couple of specialist tools that you may not have if you're starting out. Things like a torque wrench and a table jack. Now, you don't really need them. They're good to have. I worked on bikes for years without using a torque wrench. Do things up tight, not too tight. Things like when putting the oil drain bolt back into the bike, tighten it up snugly, don't lean on it. If it leaks, tighten it up a little bit more. You're better to under tighten than to over tighten, but I say that with real caution, because if you leave it loose and it falls out and all your oil drains out, you'll kill the bike. So it really is worth making sure you get it up tight, but not too tight. And without a torque wrench, that's really hard to do. But torque wrenches are expensive, but so are services with a dealer doing it for you. And this is stuff you can do yourself. With the money you will save on doing this yourself compared to giving it to a garage to do for you, you can afford to buy a torque wrench and gradually invest in the other tools that you need. This is why I have a lot of tools that you may not, and there's still lots of tools that I haven't got. It's because I work on the bikes myself and I invest that money that I'm saving into improving the tools that I've got, so I can do more work more easily. And on stuff like this, I can do it at my own pace. Anyway, so oil change, a little bit complicated, a little bit of a challenge, so let's give it a go. Right, in order to change the oil, one of the things we need to do is to get the bike sitting level. Now, I've got it up on the table here so that I can film this more easily, and so that I can get under here more easily, because otherwise it's just lying down on the ground trying to do it. Now, I've used a table jack here. I do have my wooden stand that would also slide under there, except I can't actually use it on this table because of the lip. I can't get this under here. Now, this doesn't form a tight fit under these rails. There's a little bit of wobble room, but I can shim it with pieces of plywood so that it does actually sit level. But a table jack does the same job. Again, it's a little bit of an investment, but they are really useful. And you just wind it up. This one's just hand tight because the bike is currently held at the front by the rack. I don't want to lift it because that will change the angle of the bike. I just want it enough tension so that it sits on both this rail, this side, and the other one, so the bike is dead flat on the ground, and with both wheels on the ground, so the bike is completely level. This assumes you're on level ground, of course. Right, and then the oil level will be spot on. So the first thing we do, having warmed the engine up for a couple of minutes, to get the engine warm so the oil is warm so that it will flow out easily, but not so hot that you'll burn yourself, is to remove the oil filler cap and to set it aside somewhere safe and where it's not going to get dirt over those threads. And then we need to go under the engine and remove the drain bolt. So, drain bolt hides underneath here, which isn't very obvious on this camera. but it's here, so it's underneath the side stand. Now, depending on what tool you have, you may need to play with this a little bit. I've had to remove the bolt from the side stand here in order to get a socket on here. You can get a spanner in there but not very easily, and you'll move it about one sort of notch every turn. So I'm using a socket with a floppy swivel head on it, which allows me, now that that bolt is out of the way, to get this onto here. Make sure that's really firmly seated against there, because if it's sitting at a slight angle anyway, if it's not sitting perfectly square, then you do risk damaging the bolt, or the nut or bolt. Now in here you can see I'm using 6-point sockets, which I prefer for this sort of job. If you're using multi-point sockets, then the chances of them ripping the edges or the corners off the bolt are much higher. So for this job where something's going to be tight, I prefer these. So get it in there, wiggle it around, get it really tight, and then it's just a question of loosening just very slightly. Don't want to do more than that, because as of yet we don't have the container under there. Where you've got engines like this, where it's coming out the side, it tends to come out under pressure and tends to squirt this way. What we need to do now is to slowly turn the drain bolt out, keeping pressure against it so the oil doesn't pull it out. And then when you think feel all the threads have come undone, just quickly take it out and let the oil drain. So keep pressure on the bolt as you undo it by hand. There. If you can pull it out fast enough, it'll come out clean and without getting oil all over your hands. Whilst the oil is draining, I'm going to remove and replace the oil filter. I don't know when the oil filter was last replaced, and frankly it's a good idea to replace it every time you replace the oil. Note too that these screws can be different lengths. These ones have been nicely copper slipped, so put them down in the order they came out. Right. And with the cover plate removed, we can actually remove the rest of this plate here. Note these front ones are a little bit awkward to get onto. May require getting the brake pedal out of the way. Whatever it takes for you to get onto that squarely so you don't chew the head up. As these come out, put them down in the order you took them out, so you know which ones go where if they fall out. I would suggest taking out all the difficult to get to ones first, and so note where they go, because they are all different lengths. And pull your drain under the bike at this point, so that ideally it catches oil from both back and front. Now you note that you get more oil come out here, and when you change a filter you have to put more oil back in the bike. And this is your filter element. Note which way round it goes. So we've got this rubber ring this side, and this smaller one on the other. And remember, clean as you go. get this all cleaned up. So just to illustrate, this K&N filter, you've got this small pipe bit sticking out here, and you've just got the rubber ring with a hole in it effectively. So it goes in this way round, with the pipe part going in first. Clean up all the spilt oil that will be all over your frame tubes and exhausts and stuff. Having cleaned up and got all the oil out of our hands so that they're clean and ready to go, then first thing I'm going to do is replace this O-ring here inside the filter cover. Now this one looks in perfectly good condition. The oil is really nice and clean, so I don't really need to do it, but I've got one, so I will. So the first thing we do when fitting any new O-ring, so I've been checking it's all in good condition, is we oil it, because just with some clean engine oil, and we do this so that it slips easily into place, and when put under pressure as you're putting things back together, it will slide to where it's supposed to be and not get stuck on anything. So that's in there, and we do the same with the oil seals, the rubber oil seals here. Just make sure that they go back where they're supposed to go back, and don't get stuck and bent and caught on anything as they go in. Doesn't need a lot, it's just a little bit of lubricant, and you should use clean engine oil. So this is a high flow filter. It was a K&N in there before. No real difference as far as I'm concerned. So that will go in there. Make sure it's the right way around. And then we carefully put our filter cover back into place. Right, we're not doing up tight, we're just snugging them in. So they just seat against the metal. These three sit around that rubber O-ring, so it's important that these get tightened down equally at the same time. These two really just hold this on, so they want to be done as well, but afterwards. So what we do now is just work our way around and just tighten them up evenly, a little bit at a time. Sometimes in tight spaces these are just the easiest thing to use. Just get an even pressure on them all and work your way around until they're all done up snugly. And don't forget to tighten these down as well. Don't overdo these, they've got a fine thread on them, and you will damage them if you try and put too much pressure on them. They're only tightening the O-ring up. If you squash it too hard, you'll distort it out of shape and risk it leaking. So over tightening it is more likely to cause leaks than under tightening. So just snug them all up. Make sure the Allen is in there. There we go. Then we can put our cover back on. No, this cover is purely decorative. And again, just snug them down. I mean, they're not doing anything other than holding this cover on, but you don't want them falling out either, so right, there we go. So now it's time to put some oil back in. Right, so with the oil filter back in and the cover torqued back up, it's time to put the oil in. Before we do that though, what we need to do of course is put the drain plug back in. Now on the drain plug there is a washer or a gasket. Now if this is damaged in any way, you should replace it. You don't have to replace it every time. I rarely do, to be honest, but given it's a new bike, as a matter of course, I've bought a new filter ring. Now you can see it says Moto. All the spares for this servicing on this bike I'm buying from Moto at this point. So the oil and the filters have come from Moto. So I'm putting a new one on. The old one was perfectly okay. And what I'm also doing is a tip I picked up from Del Boy's garage of using blue Hylamar just to seal the bolt threads. Hylamar doesn't dry. It's a sort of a liquid gasket, and it doesn't dry, so that it means it will fill up the spaces between in the threads, so that this will seal better. Because this doesn't dry, it should never need this seal, because the oil should never get down, should never work its way down the threads far enough to actually hit this seal. So even if the seal isn't perfectly okay, it should still seal perfectly well. So I've cleaned up this bolt and dried it off. Now there will still be oil on the threads inside the engine, but all I need to do now, once I've cleaned that off my fingers, is to put this back in, torque it up to the correct torque spec, and put some oil in the engine. So let's give that a go. What I'm going to do for the next time that I service this bike is I am either going to buy a shorter socket, which means I won't have to take this bolt out here because I'll be able to get it on, or if I can't find a shorter socket, one that's not so deep, because that's not a very deep bolt head, I'm going to grind one down. Buy one like this and grind it down so that it's shorter, and it will fit into here, as I say, without needing to remove this bolt, which would make life an awful lot easier. Just sneaking up on it. Now, it's the final torque, so just lock that. There we go. Ready to refill. Well, one further job before we do that, and let's put this bolt back in. Don't forget to unwind your torque wrench. Now torque wrenches are quite expensive, but they are a very useful tool. You can work on the bike if you've got some experience without using these, because you come to know the torque. But the only way you can do that is by first actually knowing what the torque is. It's really hard to get a socket in there, so I'm going to do it with a spanner. Okay, job done. Right, now it had been my plan to put semi-synthetic in this bike, which is what I'm assuming it had before, and which is what I normally do when I've got a new bike, is I'll change the oil, put a new filter in, put in some semi-synthetic oil and run it for a couple of thousand miles, which should clean through any debris that's in the engine. I don't believe in flushing oils. There's too much potential for damage to the engine. The oil that came out of this bike was actually quite clean. So I think the oil and filter were changed quite recently. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going straight onto fully synthetic oil for this bike. It's a little bit of overkill maybe, but I feel safe enough putting this straight in, so that's what I'm going to do. Now, with an oil filter change, this is 2.8 litres of oil is what the engine will take. This is a 4 litre can. So, okay, bear in mind this is not straight because it's leaning back on the footboard. Here we've got a series of markings, and they are 1 litre markings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a pen, I'm going to mark myself about where 2.8 litres will be, and I'm going to fill it. Now, if you don't change the oil filter, it's a lot simpler when you're changing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep an eye on the sight glass, which is hidden under here, as you'll know. But because the oil filter chamber is empty of oil, what we'll need to do is to start the bike, run it. The only way to turn the engine over realistically is to run the starter for a few seconds, turn it off, run it for a few seconds, turn it off, run it for a few seconds, turn it off, so that it pumps the oil around the engine and fills up the filter chamber. When it does that, the oil level will drop, and we will then be able to get the remainder of the 2.8 litres of oil in there. I find it's easier to sneak up on it that way. It's not a good idea to then run the engine for a long period of time without enough oil in it, because that's just going to cause damage to the engine. So we're not doing that. So anyway, I'm going to mark this up, and then it's just a question of pouring it in and watching the level. 1 litre, 2 litres, 2.5 litres, that's 3. So it's going to be around here, 2.8 litres. It's not scientific, it's not terribly accurate, it doesn't really need to be. That's why you've got a sight glass, and that's why it's really important you get the bike absolutely level when you're checking the oil. If it leans slightly either way, that level, well, just try it yourself, you'll see that level will drop and rise considerably. Okay, let's get this in. Take your time. If you chuck too much oil in, then it'll run out the top of the filler, or it'll run out of here, down here, because this will fill up while it's faster than it can run out into the engine, and then it'll make a mess, and you'll lose all your measurement because you don't know how much oil has actually dribbled out. So take it gently and give it time. You're not in a hurry. That's nearly 2 litres. Let's check the level. Okay, so the level says that's now full. So what we now need to do is turn the engine over and fill up that filter chamber. So Take this out. Put the filler plug back in to stop the oil splashing out of the hole. Now let's turn it over. That's more like it. The oil level has gone from full to empty, but as you can see it's on low, it's not actually below the line, so there's no danger of damage to the engine so long as you don't run it like that. So let's put the rest of the oil in. The amount that's right is the amount that's shown on your sight glass. The amount that Yamaha say you should put in, it depends on how much oil has actually come out of your engine when you did that. So let's just repeat the process until that level is where I want it to be, with the engine run for a few minutes. Don't forget, the oil level will drop whilst the engine is running. This is normal. So what you need to do is, having run the engine, now we know that the filter chamber is full of oil, is to let the oil level settle back down, let it drain back down for a couple of minutes, and then we check the level. Don't check it when the engine has just been running, because the oil is still up in the engine. If I add more oil now, I'll overfill it. Yeah, it's close enough to be at the right level. But don't forget, keep an eye on it. Keep an eye on your bolt. Get in there, have you put your bolt back in, and get it really dry. Get all the oil dried off from that bolt, and then keep an eye on it. If you start to see oil seeping out, probably haven't tightened it up enough, so just nip it up a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit, and then check it again. And the same on the other side of the bike, on the oil filter housing. Check for it, wipe it clean, check for leaks. Because if you've dried it off and then you get more oil, then you've got a leak and you'll have to do something about it, which is normal. Again, just nip those bolts up a little bit, make sure you do so evenly. One more thing we now need to check. Now, on the air filter side of the engine, the right hand side of the bike, on this cylinder head cover here, what you'll notice just to the right of the, it's probably not that clear on the video, just to the right of the spark plug here, there's a cutaway. None of the other cylinder head covers have this cutaway, not even the other side where the spark plug goes. And there's a reason for the cutaway, and that's because it's just big enough to put a 14mm socket in there. Because what we need to do is we need to test the oil pressure. And to check when the bike is running that the oil is reaching the cylinder heads. So this tells us that our oil pump is working properly. So what we need to do first is to start the engine, and then we will loosen this bolt slightly, just slightly, and watch in there to see some oil leak out. If it doesn't leak out, you've got a problem with your oil pump, or you haven't undone it quite enough. So maybe just a touch more, but you do not want this falling out, because oil will come out and your bike will die. If it does, then turn the engine off quickly. This is only supposed to be done up lightly, 8 Newton meters. This one is quite tight, so I'm just going to just slacken it off without the engine running first. Right, and I've got oil pressure. So this is 8 Newton meters. I've also got oil leaking down inside my engine, but it's good because it tells us that we've got oil pressure. So let's tighten this back up, and we're good to go. Oil change done. Right, so that's the oil change done on the XVS 650. It's not really that complicated. It's a little bit long-winded. It's a little bit awkward to get to. That filter cover is just a bit of a pain in the neck because Yamaha wanted the engine to look like a Harley engine. It's one of the things I do dislike about the bike, I must admit. But there you go. So, let's say, easy enough to do. Make sure you've got those bolts all tightened up. Keep an eye on it, and watch for leaks. As I say, better slightly under tightened than over tightened. Run the engine, give it a quick run up the road and back, check it, look underneath, make sure you've got no oil leaks. If you've got oil leaks, you need to tighten them up. Now on that oil pressure check, bear in mind I had already turned the engine over to fill up the filter chamber. But what you're watching for is for oil to come out very quickly from that gallery plug by the spark plug. If you're getting no oil, after a couple of seconds, turn the engine off and try it again. So if you try it 2 or 3 times and you're getting no oil up from there, stop running the engine, because otherwise something is wrong with your engine and you will be causing damage to it. Anyway, aside from that, no issues at all. It's a relatively simple job, just a little bit time consuming. Now, the one point, I mentioned special tools back at the start of the video. The one specialist tool that I didn't mention was this one. Okay, it's always worth getting a manual, and if you can get hold of the factory service manual, so much the better. I like to have as many manuals as I can get hold of for the bikes that I own, because everybody who writes about the bike does so in a slightly different way, and that gives you a much better overview as well, to add to your own personal experience of working with bikes, to make sure you're not missing something that's unique to the bike, or picking up a way of working on the bike that's better than the one you've used before. Anyway, great, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon on the next installment.